There are probably few people who would not like to know what the future holds for them. It is always desirable to look behind the veil of mystery. This is especially true for people who are young or who believe in mysticism. I was no exception, and at the most opportune time for fortune-telling. Holy Week, I decided to find out all the misfortunes and delights that fate had prepared for me. My friends supported the idea with both hands, and on the 7th of January our trio tearfully begged their parents to let us spend the night in my garden. The fact is that literally 2 stops from town we had a garden with a small house in which we were going to guess. And since this ritual required darkness, silence, and privacy, there was no better place to do it. My parents were very reluctant to let us go for a long time because of our age. We were 15, but having called the garden keeper and agreed that he would look after us, and also not having withstood our triple pressure and entreaties, we agreed. The only thing my mother asked of us was that we not guess at mirrors, saying that it could really be dangerous. And she told us a case from her youth, which happened when she was visiting relatives in Ukraine. At about your age, my friends and I decided to do fortune-telling on the soulmate. It was in a small Ukrainian village, or farm, as they called it. A lot of girls gathered there. They waved wax, threw felt boots, made fortune-telling. It reached to the last, considered the most terrible, but truthful, fortune-telling on a mirror. Everybody went to the barn, put a big mirror and prepared candles there. Girls entered the dark barn one by one, lit candles and looked in the mirror, saying, "Fiancé, fiancé, come to me for supper." As soon as the bridegroom appeared, one should sharply throw a kerchief over the mirror and say, "Dibs on me." If you didn't do so in time, great misfortune would happen. The fortune-telling was in full swing. 5 happy girls had already left the barn when they saw their betrothed. It was Njura's turn to go, an 18-year-old local beauty with hair down to her heels, the object of admiration of almost all farm boys. Njura goes into the barn and does not come out. 15 minutes passed, half an hour. The young men get nervous and start pulling the doors, but they are locked. They tried it this way and that way and they could not open them. They ran after the grown-ups. They forced the door open and saw Nura lying unconscious on a haystack, with her hair braided into millions of braids from her head to the ends. Njura did not regain consciousness for a long time, and later, although she woke up, she still could not bring herself to mind. She could not speak, did not recognize anyone, and was afraid of any sound. Her hair had to be cut off completely, to the root, because the plaits could not be unbraided. They were too thin and in countless quantities. It was impossible for a man to do that. Having listened to my mother's story and directions, we gathered all the ritual tools, took a bag with things and products, and went to find out the future. When we arrived at the house, we made ourselves comfortable, drank tea, and began the divination. We played cards and solitaire, poured wax into water, drew cups with contents predetermining the fate, burned paper, and drank coffee brewed in a mortar. When the stock of known fortune-telling had come to an end, we, the exhilarated young girls, wanted something extreme and mystical. And we, forgetting the promise we made to my mother and the horror stories about fortune-telling on the mirror, naturally decided to do this kind of fortune-telling. And not in a simple way, but by making a corridor of 2 mirrors facing each other, with candles on each side. The condition of divination was that one could only enter the room without light, otherwise it would not work, and I decided to go first. At first there was no fear, as such. I lit the candles and began to look into the mirrored corridor, not really expecting to see anything. In fact, I did not believe in the reliability of fortune-telling. For me it was perceived as a kind of game, a funny tribute to tradition, and just a fun pastime. Nothing happened for about 5 minutes. Then suddenly, a big white door appeared in the mirror, and it began to open slowly. I, as if hypnotized, could not tear my eyes away from the door and reflection. I forgot everything I had to say and do. I lost the ability to move, and a wave of some primal, all-consuming horror covered me. And then something huge appeared out of the door, as if it were ducking, black, shaggy, with burning bright red eyes. This overgrown creature had 4 limbs like arms and legs and an eerily scary face, unlike any animal I had ever known. I realized that this may seem like a silly fantasy, that such a thing is a priori impossible, but I could swear on anything that this was actually happening. I had never even tried alcohol, had never heard of drugs, and I was physically unable to imagine such a nightmare in the mirror. I had had unusual situations happen to me before, but this was the first time that they had been so fantastic and unexplainable. I don't know who or what saved me, but I managed to get out of the room and ran out of the house, barefoot, and straight out into the snow. I was terribly hysterical. I couldn't say anything. I just roared nonstop. The girls got scared and turned on the lights everywhere. In the fortune-telling room, the table and the floor were strewn with shards of mirrors, shattered to pieces. The candles went out on their own. I couldn't bring myself to go inside. My friends took my clothes out, and I got dressed on the street. We spent the night at the Keepers and took the first bus home. After this divination, for 2 weeks I was afraid to look in any mirrors and would not even go near them. I could not sleep at night either, and even if I did manage to fall asleep for a while, I would wake up with a nightmare in which this terrible creature was trying to get out of the mirror. At a baptism on January 19th, my mother and I went to a service in a church where they read over me prayers, poured over me, and gave me holy water to drink, and I seemed to calm down. Later, everything completely normalized. I never went into that house again, because a year later I left to study in another city, and in my absence my parents sold the garden. I was in the middle of the night, and I was in the middle of the night, and I was in the middle of the night. Christmas Eve. Every girl waits for these 2 winter weeks to find out what her betrothed will be like, whether he will be rich or poor, whether the girl will get married this year, and even to find out the groom's name. But at the same time, these are creepy 2 weeks when unclean powers can grab any fortune-telling girl and drag her away into the darkness. I know of 2 stories that happened during these days. The first was told to me by my grandmother. In my youth, like all girls, I looked forward to Christmas Eve, always wanted to know ahead of time how many children I would have, to know the name of my husband. But that year I was in college. The vacations were still a long time away, and I wanted to read my fortune. I remember that, as usual, we had no teacher, and the students in our group liked very much to sleep in the morning. There were only me and 5 girls sitting in the auditorium. We sat and chatted and laughed. In general, we did everything that it was possible to be engaged in absence of the teacher. And then Lenka, the noisiest of us, started talking about divination. Girls, did you know that there are such jokes, like the one that summons the gnome motherfucker? She asked with obvious enthusiasm. We answered in one voice that of course we knew. All the young people knew about it. Everyone wanted to have fun, to see if it would work or not. Sveka joined in. I know a thing or two about it. I'm sure you haven't even heard of it. We all wondered what she could surprise us with. We fell silent, waiting to hear what she would tell us. My grandmother told me about it. It takes a man we can lift on our toes. We were all shocked. How could anyone lift a man up on their toes? She saw our astonished faces and continued. The person has to lie down on the table, and we put our index fingers under his head, under his shoulders, under his arms and legs, and say, "Damn it, get him." If we can lift him up on our toes, it means the devil heard us. Thinking, of course, that it wouldn't work, everyone agreed to give it a try. But now the question was, who to give as a sacrifice? No one wanted to, even though they knew it was just a joke. At that moment, our candidate for expulsion, Maxim, came into the auditorium. We didn't have to cajole him for long. We dimmed the lights. Maxim lay down on the table. We walked over to him, put our index fingers under him, and said 3 times, "Damn it, take him away." And we tried to lift him up. At first we failed, but after a couple of seconds Maxim was as light as a feather and we lifted him up. Everyone laughed, but Max was not amused. He kept shouting that we were witches and told us to put him down. A year passed after that joke. We all forgot about it, but something happened that shocked everyone, especially the 6 of us. Maxim was walking by a construction site, and a concrete block fell on his head. Maxim died, and I still blame myself for it. That was the end of my grandmother's story. The next one is not as colorful, and was told to me by my aunt. During Christmas time, her friend decided to fortune-telling on her soulmate. She took a mirror, looked at it in the dark and whispered, "My soulmate, come to the mirror, look at me." A handsome young man appeared in the mirror. He looked at her tenderly, but after a while his tender look was abruptly replaced by rage and an animal grin, and he slapped her in the face. Auntie's friend still walks around with that hand mark. Why am I scaring you with this anyway? Maybe it's all a joke, maybe not. Think what you want. But before you guess, think 100 times about who you're calling out to. I had a friend, Lyudmila, who was constantly quarreling with her husband, Nikolai. She used to quarrel with him, picking on him whether he drank a little or was late at work or gave a wrong answer. Nicholas endured all this patiently, being by nature a reticent and kind-hearted man. He only sighed and mumbled, "Come on, Lyusenka." But she still had a problem, and in the end, Nicholas left home, or rather, did not come home. Luda immediately had a bad theory about the salesgirl from the nearby store, a former classmate of Nicholas, with whom he sometimes exchanged a phrase or two. She immediately rushed to her to sort things out. She sent her to a well-known address and said that if she were Kalia, she would not live a day with someone like her. He was right to leave, maybe rightly, but Luda was left with 2 children to raise, and she had not worked a day since she got married. At work, Nikolai, as it turned out, took a leave of absence on his own account and disappeared somewhere. Neither her mother nor her acquaintances had found her husband. What to do? Luda reasonably decided that she had to go to a fortune teller. She would know exactly where her husband was and what she should do. Very wise decision. But there was no other options, although no fortune teller Luda knew. But this did not stop her, and after a wholesale survey of all acquaintances, and not very much, turned out that only I know about one fortune teller on coffee grounds. And she lives in another city, in Krasnodar, not far from my mother. Our Luda, when she wants to, she'll do anything. She should work as a supervisor on the construction of the pyramids, not fight with her husband. She grabbed me in an arm, made me take time off work, and dragged me to my mother, leaving her children to the neighbor who had lost the power of speech and the ability to object to such insolence. So there we were at the fortune teller's house. We knocked on the gate. A huge gray-haired Armenian grandfather came out and tried to chase us away, although we knew for sure that we had come correctly. "There is no fortune teller here, go away." But it did not work with Luda. She fell on her knees in front of him and said that it was a matter of life and death. Her husband was missing. "We have to find him." Grandpa was taken aback, and while he was thinking it over, a beautiful skinny Armenian grandmother looked out of the summer kitchen. "Let them come in," she said quietly. "Can't you see they're in trouble?" The grandfather, muttering and spitting angrily, went into the house, and the old woman, who called herself Grandma Sophia, led us into the clean kitchen. "I recently had a stroke," she explained on the way, "so my husband forbade me to guess. I'm very worried about everyone, and I'm not allowed." As we sat down at the small table, Grandma Sophia gave us a stern look and immediately asked me, "Do you want coffee?" I shrugged. On the way, Lyudmila persuaded me to read my own fortune too, and she would pay, since she had dragged me to a fortune teller. "What do you need fortune telling for?" "You don't believe," said the Armenian. But Lyudmila insisted that I should have a fortune teller too. And so Lyudmila drank her cup of very tasty coffee, brewed on a small electric stove, and I drank mine. We turned the cups over onto saucers, as was our custom. Grandma Sophia was the first to take Lyudmila's cup, twisted it in her hands, and gave her an angry look. Dear Lyudachka," she exclaimed, "what a tongue you have, like a broomstick. If you continue to behave like this, your Kalia will really leave, and he'll do the right thing. It's impossible to live with you. You've driven him completely mad. I do everything for him." Luda began to justify herself. "Don't lie to me. He didn't leave you. He just decided to think about how to go on living." "What woman is he with now? Where to look for him?" Luda cried out. "He's with a friend he served with in the army," Grandma Sophia explained, twirling the cup in her hands, "and there are 3 others with them. They're drinking, but there's nothing bad. He'll come back to you in a week, and you be as quiet as you can be." "Oh, you can't do that. You'll start nagging him again," she waved her hand. "Grandma Sophia, can you bewitch him to me?" Luda asked miserably. "Otherwise he will go to another, and we have 2 children. He has no other woman. He loves you," waved off the fortune teller. "But he will if you do not calm down, and there will be no peace at home." Then Lyudmila began to pretend to cry bitterly, and the fortune teller relented. "All right," she said. "Bring me 7 colors of thread and the feces of a white dog by evening." "I will." but if you don't calm down, he'll go away anyway. Nice fellow. Pity he got mixed up with such a one, the fortune teller declared frankly. But Lyudmila was not interested in anything, as long as it suited her. Then the fortune teller told her something else about her children, about her health. But I did not remember the details. And then the fortune teller moved on to my cup. She looked into it, shuddered, and tossed it back onto the saucer with a jingle. I won't tell your fortune. She cut it off, and I'll give you your money back. I was taken aback, but Lyudmila persuaded her to do it. Say, at least tell her something. She came here for nothing, didn't she? Grandmother Sophia reluctantly took my cup again, but after a closer look, relieved to say, oh, so it's not your cross in the cemetery. That's your grandmother's memorial being built. That's when I was really dumbfounded. Indeed, my mother was just visiting my grandmother's third cousin Uncle Vidya and his wife. He had brought a dismantled stainless steel monument from St. Petersburg. He worked as a foreman in the space industry and made it himself. After my grandmother died, he told us not to put up any monument at all. They said it was my problem, because my grandmother practically raised him, an orphan, after the war. And all this to me, wow, wonders. Grandma Sophia, peering into her coffee cup, told me exactly. And what was my uncle's name, and what kind of wife he had, she also told me. And that a good monument was being erected right now, at this moment. I just nodded shocked. Everything was true. And then the fortune teller told me that I would soon have a wonderful daughter. What daughter? I wondered. We're not planning on it. Well, her name will still be rare. 8 months from now and you'll have her. So I'm already pregnant. I couldn't believe it. Because when I had my first child, I felt terrible from the first to the last day. But here, just fluttered. Then my grandmother Sophia told me that I would be separated from my husband in 5 years, even though we never fought and lived together well. That happens, they say. And she told me a lot of other things about me, about my children. But I almost didn't listen to her because I didn't believe her. I don't feel sick, I'm not pregnant. So the rest was nothing. I don't know how she found out about Uncle Vidya. Maybe we have acquaintances in common. When we came out, Lyudmila asked me, what color is your mother's dog? Redhead, I said. Oh, that'll do. She waved her hand. Where am I going to find a white one now? And in the evening she carried 7 spools of thread and a poop from our red-haired mutt to Grandma Sophia. And not from the white one, as she said, to do a spell on Nicholas, her own husband. She's a freak, isn't she? On arrival home it turned out that Collier really was staying with a former colleague in a nearby village. And the 5 of them were partying there, as Grandma Sophia said, a fortune teller on coffee grounds. Lyudmila found him there and, cursing, drove him home. They stayed together for a year, and then Nikolai took his daughter and left her son, divorced her, giving her the house and all the property. Apparently, she should have looked for a poop from a white dog, or shortened her tongue. Grandma Sophia didn't tell her to look for her husband, but to wait for him to get his thoughts together. She sold the house and left, having met someone else. 8 months later I gave birth to a daughter, Vasilisa, just as Grandma Sophia had foretold. And 5 years later I separated from my husband, who was a bit out of sorts. We didn't quarrel, we didn't have an argument, I just thought it was fairer that way. And Uncle Victor's monument at my grandmother's house is still standing, as good as new. It was only later that I realized what a unique fortune teller Grandma Sophia was. I even tried to read her coffee grounds again, but I couldn't. I did not get through her gate, and a neighbor who came out said that Grandma Sophia had been dead for 2 years. From a second stroke. Grandma Sophia was a great fortune teller, an Armenian Grandma Sophia. I never heard of them again, and I don't go to others. What do they have to do with her? To see a monument in a cup, brought from far away, and to see places of action with my own eyes and to read future names. She had an extraordinary gift. But what could such fortune-telling change? Lyudmila did not get it right. I, as predicted, did not quarrel with my husband. Would a white dog poo help change my fate? Who knows? I never got a chance to check. So, yeah, everything we're meant to do comes true. That's karma, I guess.